Okay. So our next activity, not a presentation, is envisioning open education. This is clearly a group of futurists, and we want to talk about how we can envision. Some of these ideas are still a little bit blurry. And what we want you to do, and you're going to do this in small groups, so groups of about, I don't know, I think 4 or 5 people would work the best. And by the way, our panelists, so you 5 and myself included, I'd like you to join a group, not be a group. So you join a group, and you'll be reporting, you're going to report, just as we always do in small group interaction, we're going to report back to the whole class. And, oops. So the first thing I want you to do is react. Just react to what you heard me say about open education. Reactions, don't filter them. Go ahead, be honest. What were your reactions to this presentation? Maybe the way I was talking was annoying you. Maybe the way I don't know, whatever. Okay, and I want you, but no, react to open education, the ideas that were discussed. And then the next thing, about 10 minutes. Then the next thing, move on to imagine your ideal OER. Now, you all are from very different institutions, different places. You teach different languages. You teach different levels. So it's going to be all over the place. That's okay. But what do you really want? The future. Imagine the future of pedagogical materials. Where should this be going? So you're writing a textbook. This would be a good exercise for you. What kinds of things would you like available? And then finally, brainstorm. So again, 10 minutes to that. And then brainstorm solutions to 1 or 2 of the challenges to open education. Not all of them, that's too many, but choose a challenge and see if you can brainstorm some possible solutions to that challenge. Okay, so first identify the challenge that you want to attack, and then brainstorm. Brainstorm, right? They don't always have to be completely all thought out. So all together, that's going to be a half an hour. And then we will have reports back from people from the groups. So what were your reactions? What were your imaginings? And what were your brainstormings? Okay? I'd like, what we're going to do now is you've had approximately 10 minutes to talk just about your reactions. So I want some summative statement. It doesn't have to be pretty with a bow on top. Just what are your, let me ask the moderators of the different groups if they would share. So real quickly, what was the gist of the discussion in your group? What were the reactions? And I'll start with George. George will tell me what his small group said. Oh, better yet, you can come up here. Yes, even better. Yeah, come on. You can talk to them. You can talk to the people. We have about 20 people online. So actually, why don't all the group moderators come down here as?
So in our group, we were just talking about things that are going on in our home institutions that make OERs appealing. So for example, there's one person in our group whose administrators found her use of OERs wonderful, so much so that she got a teaching award for doing it, and it helped with her tenure. She ended up using a lot of materials that were once publisher-sponsored materials, but the copyright had expired on it, is that right? And they no longer published it, so she got direct permission from the author to convert those into an OER. We also talked about the whole question of economy. So these things aren't free to make, so how does economics come into the question? We also talked about how historically there are examples of publishers who have kind of shaken students down for their money, so it's about time there's some pushback there. There's also the question of finding an OER and using an OER as a teacher or as a learner. How do I use these things as opposed to the things that come to you on a silver platter with a bow on top from a publisher? It can be daunting as a learner to figure out where to go and what to click on, etc., or as a teacher. Some people use them just as supplements to their teaching. They may have adopted a publisher-sponsored text, and they use OERs to kind of fill in the gaps or to address particular things that the textbook doesn't. We also pointed out that no resource is complete, and you have to kind of cobble things together anyway. Yeah.
Okay, and just for you online, that was George Dediwood. And now Fernando Rubio.
So our group reacted to the idea of time. How much time do we have? And how much time can we spend on, working on open educational resources? Is the administration at our schools willing to give us the time that we need to invest on creating and using open resources? We also reacted to the fact that we've been talking about open educational resources for several years, and we're still kind of slow in terms of reacting. We're not where we should be yet. So we were discussing how structures are slow to change. Ideas change a lot faster, but structures are slow to change. We're entrenched in certain structures that are resistant to change. And we mentioned how if you teach at a public school, for example, where you are not allowed to use YouTube, or students are not allowed to use their cell phones, how are you going to be able to access materials that are, online, basically? Right? So those are some of the challenges that we thought we should be able to address.
Yay. Okay, and then Chris Jones.
Okay, we had several comments. One of them, Jacqueline, who mentioned a very creative process within our school district, partially in response to out-of-date textbook materials, but where they had a shared server, really sort of a pre-web process, which is now migrated onto the web, and that includes materials from Coral. And another person in higher ed who also talked about the issues of cost, textbook cost, and who saw the potential for contributions at advanced course levels rather than just basic language courses. We just got started talking with a third member of our group about localization and personalization potential in delivering courses with OER materials, and that's sort of where we got hung up. So that's
good. Rachel Preston.
One of the things that our group talked about was we liked the fact that this is free and open material, because I am here with two of my colleagues, and we come from a place where we don't have a lot of resources available to us or money to acquire those resources. We also like the fact that these OERs are updated, tend to be updated more frequently than, for instance, the textbooks that we have to use. We were talking about the fact that vocabulary can be out of date, including technology vocabulary. We're teaching our students from a chapter that talks about floppy disks, and our students have no idea what a floppy disk is. So it doesn't help them very much. And I think that was all was there anything else? Yeah, that was pretty much what we talked about.
Good. Carla O'Donnell from Texas Christian.
We talked about some of the things that have already been mentioned, but a couple of the other issues that came up were the accessibility for all of the students. A lot of people here are from higher education, so we know that in higher education, a lot of students have accessibility at school when the system doesn't go there. But for example, K through 12, do we have a language lab? Do they have only access at school and not at home? Do they even have a computer at home? So how does that work? And the other one is about people that are creating these documents or this open education ideas. They need to probably think about, can we make these not only web-based, but also in a form where they can be printed and accessible on paper or hard copies or something, so that, again, we can use be more accessible to K through 12 groups.
Great. That's, a terrific comment about not just to focus on higher ed, but of the whole spectrum, K through 12 as well. So Amy Rosamundo from KU.
So we had 2 graduate students in foreign language education in our group, and we asked them whether or not they're learning about open educational resources in their courses. And you know, their response sort of echoed Carl's experience out in the real world when he asked people to raise their hands if they've heard of it. Not so much so far. They're not hearing about this in their course work. And then the second part of our conversation focused on the different Creative Commons licenses, and the concerns about derivative work, because Devin was in our group and she had mentioned that about the unit that she created, and that is honestly a concern that we have with Accesso, so we started to have that discussion. Actually, Jacqueline's project too has we discussed some potential pitfalls with having derivative use of those sociolinguistic interviews. What if someone were to take it, package it, and then criticize the use of language in it, as this is an example of how we don't talk, which is just the exact opposite of the intent of the project in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, yeah. And again, I want to reiterate that the whole point of Creative Commons licenses is it's on a continuum, so you get to choose what level of openness is appropriate, not just your comfort level, but what's appropriate for your materials. So a corpus of people who are sociolinguistic interviews is very different than pedagogical a textbook. So yeah, it's not one size fits all. Okay, so let's move on then to our next topic. Same kind of thing. Imagine your ideal OER. That should be fun. Don't stay in the box. What's your ideal OER? What should it have? All the bells and whistles. Are you tired of imagining? Have you dreamed all possible worlds? Yeah, okay. All right, then let me have my my group moderators come up. Well, they're coming up up here. Amy and Chris and Fernando and Jonathan. The people online, our virtual group, were having a discussion. I don't know whether you talked about this here, but they were talking about having simulations. So simulating culture, the culture, something like Second Life, perhaps. That would be a cool thing to have in OERs. So, George.
So in our group, we want our OERs to be interactive, and by interactive, we mean truly interactive, to where you get error correction and it's individualized to each learner. We want authentic content that's used in context, not just talking about language, but using the language in context. We'd like to have search engines to be able to find what it is we want to find, both we as teachers and learners to be able to find what they want to find as well. Some monitoring, accountability, tracking, to where you can get some scores and find out what students are doing. We want it to be time-saving. We want it to address multiple learning styles, learning strategies, multiple intelligences. We want it to be relatable, and we want it to be accessible through multiple platforms, different LMSs, different kinds of devices, and I think that's it. And free.
We also want them to be free. We want them to be accessible from a variety of platforms. We want the ability to archive our students' work. So if our students are responding by recording something, we want to be able to archive it so that the teacher has access to it. We want the ability to have both online and print components, or the ability to print some of the components. We want to involve the users as creators so that students also participate in the process of designing, creating activities, contributing materials. We want them to be towards the left side of the Creative Commons openness continuum. So open, completely open, without restrictions. And we want them to be constantly updated.
I'm just thinking about, Rachel, come on up, the idea of archiving all of your students' work, and if you could create like a second language user corporate corpus, and what that would mean for IRB, and you could do all kinds of things. That could open up a can of worms. Rachel.
We were really focused on the idea of having a community of teachers, of people using these resources. It's really important to our group to have access to other minds who are using these materials or who know where other good materials are. So having some form of even just something like a forum or email listserv, anything like that, where you can ask questions and have anybody who's a member of your community answer that question. Also, it's important to us to share materials like professional materials like your syllabi or lesson plans, and also cultural materials like videos or photos and other cultural materials. And the other thing we focused on was having materials that are tailored to students of all ages and all proficiencies, not just to one group. Having a way to find those materials or have them all gathered in one place was very important.
Yeah, that was great. I still don't understand why commercial publishers aren't investing money in all the or using social media, wrapping their materials around social media. So come on up. Devin.
So I'm stepping in for Amy. We decided to do an open source moderation. So one of the things that we really jumped on was funding, actually. So it's not specific to the material, it's more to the creation of the material. So we were talking about how the funding, especially in the big OERs, it seems to be top-down, also the coordination. And we imagined a way that the funding could also be more shared and also the coordination, so that if individuals leave a specific university, the project doesn't die. We were also talking about updating, that this again is related to funding. If there is some sort of long-term funding, then you could be assured that the materials will be updated in a timely way. So those were the things that we discussed.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Jonathan.
I think we've mentioned many of the things we've already talked about, multiple formats, web versus analog, as well as mobile formats of whatever the OER was, community for discussing methodological processes, for posting variants of lesson plans, so some that might work for K through 12, some that might work for higher ed. I think the big question that we were really struggling with was, although we want multiple formats, there are some things the web can do that paper cannot. And it seems odd to cheat ourselves of the interactivity of the web, the multimedia that the web offers that paper does not. And there's also the feeling that we need to teach the students some sort of technical literacy. And the best way to do that is to not be teaching them specifically computers as some ad hoc thing, but to have the computers embedded in what they're doing in daily practice. So that the computers, in some sense, disappear and become transparent, and they don't think about the technology, they think about the language only.
Okay, and Chris.
Okay, we talked about tools for self-evaluation, post-use of OERs, either in or out of class, additional templates for creation of interactions and exercises and activities, and social connectivity opportunities. We talked about some of the pitfalls of this, including in Second Life, of course, where there are legion. And then we talked about a repository, which, of course, to a certain extent, OER Commons is a repository, but I told the story of looking for my own course, French Online, and finding it under social science in the OER Commons, which was a little puzzling. Has anybody ever heard of Kickstarter? Yeah. Well, how about Kickstarter for OERs? You know, I mean, that great idea. Funding, you know.
Tell people what Kickstarter is.
Okay, Kickstarter, I'm also a songwriter. Carl doesn't like songwriters because they're at every street corner here. But there's a lot of songwriters now. Kickstarter is basically a crowd sourcing of the funding of albums these days and other artistic projects. It's not just for music. But so you appeal to your audience to kick in and then use that money to record the CD and promise certain things in return. So the model could work as the fact is our funding issues at the moment are problematic for OERs, for sure. That's one of the big obstacles, which we'll probably talk about next.
Kickstarter for higher education. That's what I need. Okay, so the last thing, I know you've done a lot of reacting, imagining, and the last thing is to brainstorm solutions to an obstacle or a challenge to open education. You can either like look at all these different obstacles or focus on one. So 10 minutes to come up with a solution. We've just been talking about funding, that's a big one, and Kickstarter may be part of the solution. So 10 minutes. Okay, I think our groups have solved all the problems with OER and open education. And I would, Kira, that comment, I want to start off with a really cool idea from somebody on the internet who talks about forming coalitions with librarians. That we need to really talk to librarians who are plugged into OER in the world of open education. And in particular, what was the organization? The American Association of School Librarians need to understand about OER. So that's, yeah, they have a lot of experience, but we need to promote our materials through that community. Okay, George.
Some people find that developing their own OERs is a big time investment that may not be rewarded by their home institution. So maybe there could be some kind of professional vetting organization that puts some kind of seal of approval on foreign language OERs, like Coral, for example, might review outside OERs and approve them somehow and say, yes, these are good things. There's a problem of buy-in, convincing people to use them within your own department, for example. I'm intimately familiar with this issue. And I think one of the problems there is that people like the fact that they can pick up the phone and call a book rep and get their problem solved, right? And I tend to tell my colleagues, well, just think of me as the book rep, you know, just come to me. And we in an academic environment should be doing that, discussing issues with one another and sharing and helping one another out. Quality versus cost, that's kind of a big challenge. So maybe we could sell ads and have pop-ups in Français Interactif. I don't know. I know, right? Technology access is a big issue. Not everybody has high-speed internet. Not everybody has a device. So maybe the hybrid model might be a good way to go, to where those learners who don't have a netbook or whatever can go to a lab or something like that on campus and kind of catch up whatever they might have missed for not having access to the technology-based version of an OER.
So our group was trying to brainstorm solutions to our derivatives, no derivatives concerns, and we were maybe thinking we're stuck on it, but because we actually do want to solve. I mean, it's an important issue, and so maybe there needs to be a license somewhere in between, you know, free for all and no derivatives, so that it would be either vetted derivatives, which might be too time consuming, or you know, do your derivative at your place, just don't whip it back up online. Because, and our concern comes from protecting the participants in the projects. If we want to use Jacqueline's project as an example, you know, these people did the IRB and were interviewed under certain conditions. And you rip the video, you repackage it in a certain way, and then you're not keeping your, you know, promise that you made when you got people to participate in the first place.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that. There are legitimate concerns, and that certainly is a big one, protecting participants in a study, for example, protecting maybe anonymity or the content that they're sharing, and there are ways of doing that. So that's the idea of the, as you say, the degrees of openness. So check out, I would say check out Creative Commons and look at the different array of licenses. So yeah. Fernando?
Our group tried to tackle a couple of issues. One is the idea of communities. There wouldn't be open educational resources without communities, but how do you create a community? And we thought that we need to start small with basic ideas and small ideas, like, you know, basically creating a listserv of users, of like-minded people who are interested in the same things that you're interested in, and that way creating a core group of users and then doing outreach to enlarge that community. And we also tried to tackle the issue of getting the word out. Carl mentioned before that, you know, you ask people about OERs and they don't know what you're talking about. How do you get the word out, particularly to administrators who are the ones who are going to be giving you the resources that you need to spend time and effort on using and creating open educational resources. So, we were talking about how if you're teaching in a public school, your administrators are worried about the bottom line, no child left behind. So how can you convince them that using open educational resources and spending time developing resources is going to have a positive effect on their bottom line? Right?
Yeah, I want to add to that. The Texas legislature passed a couple years ago a law which now allows teachers to use OER. They didn't even know about this because some school districts said you had to only adopt textbooks that were vetted by TEA, the Texas Education Association agency. And now you can use materials that are online. The problem is, of course, they can't get access to it if they have a firewall or they're not allowed to use online materials. So there are still issues of access, and you're right, it has to do with the community of educating not just teachers but administrators. That's a big problem. I want to say about the communities issue. We are now a community, so we're identifying you. You're here because you're interested in this, and again, I want to kind of see this idea that we have a follow-up to this. It's kind of a surprise, but we hope that all of you will join and continue interacting with each other and help each other with these issues, because the issues aren't going to go away once the symposium finishes.
We talked about a couple of different problems, and one of them was we did talk about funding, and something that would work in perhaps some of the more closed systems would be offering memberships after a trial period. So for instance, if you look at some commercial enterprises like Netflix, they will actually offer a free month trial for you to look and see if there's actually things you want to use or watch on their site before you have to start paying the fee. So offering something like that would bring in funding. Also, in order to encourage people to sign up, you could offer a discount if you bring in, for instance, your whole class, or if a school brings in multiple classes, offering a discount on the membership would still bring in funding for you, but it could give people a bit of an incentive to still do it despite the cost. The other thing we talked about was improving searchability. So it would be very helpful when you're looking at materials in an OER to know what it's about. So in terms of its topic, who it's suitable for, what ages it's suitable for, what kind of audience it's suitable for, especially if you teach high school or middle school, if it's appropriate for that audience. Something about proficiency as well, knowing what proficiency level that this material is for would be something very useful. And you could very easily create just a system of tags and be able to search via those tags to find things with the appropriate metadata for you.
Okay, so thanks, Rachel. You're doing like a promo for our session after lunch, which is on searching, because we're going to answer a lot of the questions. I mean, I know how to use search engines, but Rachel's going to show you lots of really cool tricks that are good for OER. Chris.
Okay, well, following up on that, the notion of the repository notion, one of our members brought up the point that the actual vetting of authentic resources, not sort of educator-created OERs, but the vetting itself is in fact an OER. So Tennessee Bob's Links was an OER. I don't think it's really up anymore, but web links. But it's something that combined, in other words, a searchable repository, which would have these tags and so forth. And Rachel's going to talk about it more later. The creation of the tags itself, the identification of authentic materials on French, Quebecois, Caribbean sites, etc., African sites in French would be itself an OER, which is kind of an expanded definition. We also riffed a little bit on the Kickstarter concept. In other words, in Kickstarter, what you get for funding is usually a CD. And what would you get for funding in OER? And we talked about the possibility of, enlisting a coral T-shirt, for example. Well, anything is possible, but we talked about the way people do things in local communities. And we have Jacqueline, who's a middle school teacher. In other words, in the community, who would be willing to give a reward? And almost any business is. it ends up being work for the organizer of the Kickstarter campaign. So if you contribute $100, you get a free meal at the local French restaurant or whatever, or at the local pizza joint, or attendance at some sort of culturally linked celebratory event at the end of the campaign or something. So the Kickstarter idea still has legs.
I think we went over a lot of the same ground other people did, so I'll just briefly, if we were sort of assuming that the optimal solution from the last question would be, again, a sort of web-based, interactive, multimedia-rich OER, but that raised the big issue that we then had to deal with was how do you overcome limited technology environments, particularly K through 12? And obviously that's a very thorny issue. Sort of what we were thinking might be possible would be basically to figure out some way to take the money that was currently being given to textbooks and put that toward technological infrastructure rather than textbooks which are 10 to 15 years old. And then we were figuring, well, assuming now we have the infrastructure, how do we get a textbook that is suitable for K through 12? Because at least as far as I know, most OER I've seen is aimed more at higher ed to a certain extent. So we were trying to figure out some way to increase the local sharing, usually within schools or perhaps within school districts, to become more sort of interinstitutional, national, international, to get people out of the silos they're in. So we were discussing the possibility of trying to figure out some way to do a sort of K through 12, middle school, high school Spanish textbook that's built from all of the materials that people all have, that they all have sitting on their hard drives on their computers where no one else can get to them except maybe a few of their colleagues. And then discussing perhaps having graduate students who are trying to complete educational degrees or trying to create subject area degrees, creating materials as projects, those projects being aimed particularly at K through 12. And we talked a bit about repositories and the idea of you can add metadata to them, you can make them searchable, but in some sense it might be nice to have an editorial voice. In other words, someone goes through the repository. We were just talking about Bob Peckham, I think that's his name. How he had done that, how he had gone through and selected them, that if the textbook could be created from a community's work, but that it was an editorial voice that made sure that all the topics were covered and that there was a continuity between them, that might be nice as well.
Okay, you guys hit all the highlights, so we all now have established what it is that we're talking about. We have an understanding of OER and open education, the problems and some possible solutions. So there's even more food. You can still finish off all those migas there. But we have, in the atrium, we have a break until 1 o'clock. So eat and come back, and we'll hear from our panel.